Boom, according to that I am live. Welcome, this is Tokyo Tonight. Good to see you all. Again, apologies for the last minute notice, as Erin was just commenting there. Yes, I didn't set this one up early. I actually just sorted out the magazine and the articles that I'm going to talk about. And yeah, remember with all of these, by the way, in the video information below, I've got the link to the Flipboard where I actually have the links to all this week's articles, so you can actually look them up yourself and read if you are interested. But yeah, another week. We are another week into the extended state of emergency, which was extended this week for a further 2 weeks. It was supposed to end on the 7th of March. However, it's being extended to the 21st of March in Tokyo and surrounding prefectures, Saitama, Chiba, Kanagawa, where the numbers are still high. And frankly, the 7-day average this week was 99.3% that of the previous week, which I think they could have just said it only went down 1 or something like that. But basically, it is going down, but it is almost not going down. In fact, it's almost going up again. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about this week. There's a few things happening with vaccines, with trends overall, with where the cases are going. And I must admit, the penny dropped a little bit this week. That yeah, when you look at the wave graphs and everything, it really looks, I mean, it never looked like a good idea to have the Olympics in July, but it looks like an increasingly terribly bad idea, and I'm going to explain why that is. But anyway, that's what's going on. It is lovely and warm. We are actually this week going to have one of the earliest hanami, cherry blossom viewing seasons that we've ever had in Japan. In fact, the weather news, I guess it's climate change. I mean, you would assume that we've had more of these sort of things happen. You can't say that a specific year or a specific event is climate change. But these kinds of things, like, you know, like it warming up sooner, and that happening over multiple years, this is a trend that we are getting lately. Every year it's getting earlier and earlier, and this is happening. It's on the whole a bad thing, I suppose, that we are having a cherry blossom season, early. But normally it doesn't start until basically the last week of March or the first week of April in Tokyo. But it's definitely going to happen this week. It's scheduled for March 15th. I'll talk a bit about that as well, but just in terms of what's going on, it is nice that it's warm, although we had a couple of cold days, but it's warming up fast. But yeah, it's going to be a hot summer ahead, and again, it shows what's going on in the world. Great to see so many people here in the comments. I'm going to say hello to all of you. Remember, as always, you don't have to super chat me. I don't mind if you super chat me, but I do appreciate, if you just do what Andrea Moboya did. I'm close. I'm always close. Yes, I brought the camera forward a little bit when I was adjusting the angle. If you are interested in making a comment that will grab my attention, like Andrea just did, just add Mark Hiko Simon in the comments. It will flash orange, and I will be able to see it. If you'd like me to either just say hello, grab my attention, say something to me, or ask me a question, or ask me request a topic or something, feel free to do that. As always, I will definitely take those. Huge thanks again to Erin, who is there in the comments. She is my moderator, and she is also the wonderful person who has been editing the short versions of these videos through the week, which is great if you are watching the show recorded. Yeah, those shorts pick out the main parts of the show, like with the news updates and so on. And yeah, it's great for me. It makes it easy to catch up and see what's in the comments. And I hope it makes the channel a little bit easier to follow, and especially to get into for new people. I realize that just getting into a 1 hour long video or a channel that's full of nothing but 1 hour long videos is pretty intimidating for people who are new. So, yeah, get hooked on the shorts and stay for the longs and be a part of the video, which you can be, which all of you are being right now there in the comments, which I very much appreciate. Remember, if you're here, even if you just like to lurk, I love it when people say hello. I especially love it when there's new comments. I also love to hear where you all are tuning in from around the world. I just get a huge buzz out of the fact we have people on all continents, and it's just such a good chat little window anyway. I think the tone and everything on this channel is really great, and I get a real kick out of seeing who's in there. So yeah, let's dive in, say hello to everyone who's there, and then let's dive into the topics. But going back up the top, let's see who's here. Please say hello. I'd love to include you all in the round of shout-outs, even if you're not that much into commenting. Erin, great to see you again. No notification because I only actually set this ready to go 1 minute before it went live, so apologies. This is why I do the show at 10:30 p.m. at the same time every week. So at the very worst, you can just look at my channel and you'll see the notification come up at the last minute. Guys, English World, good to see you. He is a devastating Among Us player. He actually got me on the in the game the other week. That was a lot of fun, and also YouTube channel actually teaching English and whatnot, and a Kiwi. So good to see you guys, English World. Quinn Rankett, good to see you as always. Andrew Morboy, great to have you here in the chat. I know it's late there in Australia, so I do appreciate it. I hope everything is good down there in Melbourne. It sounds like Australia's been pretty good lately, apart from the Italians taking all your vaccines. I'm surprised Australia actually isn't more upset about that, given how easily upset Australians get. Like, if it was Queensland taking like Victoria's vaccines, I'm pretty sure there would be military action taken. So, but no, they seem to be quite good sports about it, and I'm glad to see that everything seems to be well down there in Australia. Hope they're all as well. That reminds me, there was an earthquake in New Zealand. My dad lives in the far north of New Zealand, which is close to where the earthquakes were, although he didn't feel any of them, even though it was a magnitude 8, but they're quite a way out at sea. But there was a big concern about the tsunamis. He's quite an elevation and inland, so he was okay. But yeah, everyone commenting actually that it's not the topics for tonight, but just while I'm remembering, everyone in Japan very much remembers that we are coming up on the 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, and that was preceded by a large earthquake in Christchurch a couple of weeks before. And obviously it's on the same plate, the same Pacific Ring of Fire. So everyone a bit spooked by that, but. Yes, it's funny how these things happen in places that I'm connected to. Anyway, good to see you, Andrew Morboy. Good to have you here in the chat. We've got Sergeant Bilko, the man from Sweden. Good to have you in our comments with the explosive emojis and booms all over the place. Good to see you. Mr. Cordy Chap commenting that I'm uncomfortably zoomed in. All the better to see you with. Yeah, I can zoom out if you like. It's kind of a manual system. I'd push the monitor back. I don't know, do you want to see more of the room or less of me? Or maybe I could just put a mosaic or something on. I'll try to fix that in future. But yes, I also want to be close to the mic because people sometimes comment that my audio seems to be low. I'm looking at all the control stuff at the moment, and I'm yellow just below redlining. So I think this is as loud as I can reasonably be. But anyway. Mr. Cordy Chap, excellent to have you here as always. Brianna W, excellent to have you here. Thank you for joining. Barry Convex, good to have you in the chat. Thank you for joining. Kiwi Butter, good to hear you getting the good stuff there, Andrea Morboy. Who else is in here? We've got looking for new names. Andrea Morboy, a public holiday in Melbourne tomorrow. Woohoo, lucky you. Which holiday is it? March. I guess I shouldn't try to even figure it out. But yeah, congrats on the holiday. So yes, enjoy the show. You can sleep in. That's good news. Sarita J, good to see you there in the comments, and thank you for saying hello. Who else is in here? We've got 28 degrees in Melbourne. Autumn colours are here. Hey, autumn colours at 28 degrees. That still, from where I am right now, sounds like the leaves being burned off the trees more than proper autumn. But yeah, take what you can get, I suppose. Tudom, good to see you. Hey, Olympic spectators, thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, there's a debate about that. I guess I'll remind me if I don't touch on that. But that is another thing. I mean, at this point, it's not even the spectators. You're talking 100,000 athletes and staff coming just for the event, let alone whether you're going to have any spectators who are Japanese or foreign spectators. That's a debate. So yeah, Tudom, definitely going to get into that tonight. Quinn Rankett, you're near New York City. Okay, well, actually, I did not know that. So actually, that's nice to know that. That means, wow, you're in a really terrible time zone from a Japan perspective. Or I guess at night it's better. In the morning it's bad. I'm always thinking that basically conference calls with New York are like the toughest to do because one of you are always too early or too late. So yeah, really appreciate you joining. Actually, I didn't realize that. I assume NYC, you mean New York City. Mr. Cordy Chair, viewing from Antarctica with a big smiley face. I actually saw some documentary on the scientific stations in Antarctica, where apparently, they rely, because they don't have cables going down, cabling in internet to Antarctica. The stations down there rely upon satellite-based internet, which apparently is crap. It's like Australia speeds. It's really bad, and it only actually connects for they only get a window of 30 minutes a day or something to go and download all their emails. It's basically the speed of the old-fashioned connection. So it really strikes me as a space geek that probably living down in Antarctica is probably a lot like what it would be being on Mars or something like that, at least with the reduced communication speeds. And also very exciting with the Starlink satellites and the Kuiper satellites and everything, promising probably better bandwidth, high-speed bandwidth, satellite-based, low Earth orbit based internet than you can probably get in Australia. relatively affordably, relatively soon. It's going to be great for the people down in Antarctica when they get that. And again, I guess it'll be something that'll make living in space better. That's, of course, believing you sincerely, Mr. Cordychap, that you're in Antarctica. I'd love to have someone from Antarctica watching at some point, but we've got to get those satellites going. Before Sainted Sir, we have Shubis, fashionably late. Hey, Shubis, you are perfectly on time. Buenos dias. Great to have our Panama representative here, and thank you for joining. We've got Sainted Sir in New York. You're in New York as well. It is an 8:38 a.m. Well, okay, so it's a good time. Glad to have you here. That's right. I guess in the middle states and the West Coast for the nighttime slot. That's right. It gets less convenient. I work with the West Coast, but I do all that stuff in the Japan morning, I suppose. So, makes sense. Odie Jr. Boom, boom, boom. I'm early. Yeah. Well, I'm on time, but that's early by my standards. So yes, thank you for noticing. Still love that King Charles Cavalier dog icon that you have. I appreciate that. Not that much, Des. Good to see you indeed. Who else have we got in here? Anyone else in the comments? Please say hello. It's lovely to say hello to everybody. I see that we've got, I think I just jumped a few. Officially autumn there in Australia, says Andrew Moboy. Wingstar. Hey now. Hey Wingstar. Good to have you in the chat. And good to have you back. Labor Day holiday in Australia, so congrats on that. I think I said hello to Brianna W. I see Tokyo 503. Good to see you. First Tokyo Tonight show of March. Cold today at 7 degrees. Yeah, I did I even go outside today? I think I did. Yeah, I went up to the supermarket, but it was yes, today was cold. It's going to get warm again the rest of this week, but today was a chilly day indeed in Tokyo. And is there anyone else? Gilded Nerd. Oh, there we go. Oh, Tech Art 2 is back as Gilded Nerd. I like the new brand, and good to have you, Gilded Nerd, and good to know that you are the artist formerly known as Tech Art 2. Good to see you. And the Becky Taylor Show. Good to have the Becky Taylor Show also here in the comments, along with everyone else. Well, thanks for joining. Let's dive into the topics. I will try to be mindful once again about trying to give Aaron editable slots, probably for that. I think for the first heads up to Aaron and anyone else watching, the first two big stories, one on gender issues in Japan and secondly on coronavirus latest. We'll probably cover multiple stories that I saw that are sort of on the same theme, so they'll probably all be one chunk, but I'll try to make it so that we can cut them out and make them easy to watch as shorts later during the week. So, definitely remember at Mark Yukosaima if you want to grab my attention. If you're in the chat, just say hello. It's just nice to see you, and let's dive into the topics. Hey, Becky Taylor Show, good to see you. So, kind of an obvious one, but the first story. In fact, I feel like I should start again, making it easier to edit. Okay, so let's gender issues in Japan. How is Japan doing? That's what the first few stories for tonight are going to be about. Basically, not much of a news flash, of course, but the statistics came out once again that from NHK. An international survey shows that female representation in national parliaments around the world has reached the highest level ever. However, Japan, although the average level around the world is 25.5%, which is still astoundingly low, Japan actually has less than 10% of its lower house members are actually women. And this is particularly astounding given that, in Japan, well, I'll explain in a moment, but, Japan, this isn't a situation like where you have everybody running in races in different places. So you could have lots of women competing for seats, but if none of them win, the seats, if they all just lose by 1% to a man in every seat, you can end up with 0 women in a first-past-the-post electoral system. However, Japan is different. Japan has a mixed member proportional representation system, which means that... you can have the parties can decide themselves that basically when people vote for a person, sure, that person will win, whoever that is, but they also vote for a party. And basically the parliament is composed of the number of seats that party won. So if 30% of people vote for the LDP gets to put up a list of people where they can decide it can be whoever they like. They don't have to actually get elected, those people. They're just people who are nominated by the party to fill the 30% of seats that they win. And those could be Martians. They can be anything. And so basically parties in Japan have a discretion to decide themselves how many women are in parliament. They get to decide that. And actually countries with similar systems like in Scandinavian countries and also in New Zealand and so on, that has a similar system. Yeah, the parties actually decide, in some countries, like I believe in Scandinavian countries, they actually have legally mandated quotas for gender representation. But in most countries, parties just decide under their own party rules to have minimum levels. But in Japan, yeah, it's funny, you have these astoundingly low rates, which means that, out of the, Japan was what was it, less than 100. What was the number? Out of 193 countries, Japan was lower than 100. What was it? It was like 165th out of 193 in terms of women representation, which is just astounding given that the electoral system was 166th on the list, one place lower than a year earlier, out of 193 nations. So it's pretty awful. And I know that there are some people who like to say, oh, you're just being woke and you're just virtual signaling, and in the end of the day, the best qualified people or whatever should do it. If there aren't women who aren't interested in politics, we shouldn't force them to get into politics. But the thing is that, if you don't have, particularly in like governing the country in terms of politics and so on, if you don't have women, representing, you actually, they don't need me in parliament. But if you don't have proper representation, again, you have people who can't see or visualize, issues that are relevant to 50% of the population. I mean, gender, I realize, is no longer considered, it never was, I should say, a binary thing, of course. There are lots of permutations, but generally, women are generally considered to make up half of the population. They face a lot of issues that elderly men, even well-intentioned men, just can't, see, or normally wouldn't understand unless they can actually see it through the sort of perspective of women. And this means that you end up with bad issues and policy issues and whatnot, which come up with these other sorts of issues. Particularly, there's been a lot of stories this week with the 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake coming up this week, March 11th. And this was kind of known at the time, although I must say we didn't hear many stories of it. You heard a lot of stories about this happening after the Kobe earthquake, but what definitely happened... Hey Raz, I'm definitely going to come back. Thank you for the super chat. I'll come back and check out if you've got a question for me later on, but I really appreciate that. With the Great East Japan earthquake and with these sorts of things, there was a special on NHK which kind of casually mentioned in Japanese what sounded like cases of sexual assault and rape that were happening within the evacuation centers, but they sort of put it delicately when they were explaining how these each of these town councils, which have these boards that consider the evacuation plans and the emergency plans for when there are earthquakes or tsunamis and people have to move into gymnasiums or whatever for safety. They were talking about how all of these sort of emergency boards were dominated basically by elderly men, by the councillors from the town and so on. And all of these plans hadn't really taken into account the needs of women evacuees. And this was the case with the Great East Japan earthquake, where in the Tohoku region of Japan, they were talking about how, for example, women, there were no partitions, so there was no private spaces for women, for example, women who were breastfeeding or women who wanted to change. There were no separate toilet facilities for women or whatever. And there were situations where, for example, women who were breastfeeding had men ogling them, staring at them and sort of intimidating them. There were women there was no lighting in the toilets, which were outside and were single sex. So there were women who were cornered and were afraid to go and use the toilets, particularly at night. And there were women who talked about how when they were sleeping under blankets in an open gymnasium with no partitions, men would climb in under their blankets and assault them. And as well as stories of actual people who actually ran some of the evacuation centers, taking advantage of those positions to pressure women and sometimes outright assault them. And this was pretty widespread. And the thing is that the elderly men who plan these things assume that people don't do this sort of thing and don't plan anything for women, for extra security or consideration of what women might need for these sorts of things. And the NHK was saying that they had a woman in a particular area in northeast Japan who was giving her an account of having these problems, and was giving her perspective that, oh yeah, you need to do this, you need to have separate, you need to have breastfeeding areas, you have to have areas that can be safe for women and children, you need to think of security, you need to think of these things. None of these things were in any of the plans, and you have the old mayor of this town who was saying they were so glad to have her on the board because no one actually realized that any of these things were problems. And I think this is, apart from the fact it's horrifying that this was something that was happening, and I don't think this is specifically a Japan problem. I think this is something that, could and likely does happen, wherever in the world when these sorts of things happen. But you go back to the first story, when you've only got, even in the national parliament, 10% of people in parliament are women, it means that even if you've got the best intention of representing all of your representatives and being nice and doing the right thing for everybody, you can't do what you don't know. What you can't see. You can't address that. So this is why this is exactly why you need to have representation. If not 50%, at least sufficient representation to make sure that those voices and to make sure that those concerns are understood and taken into account when making decisions that can really affect the safety and well-being of women, and this goes into all sorts of areas. There's no policy that doesn't affect, and it's funny how there are things that when you're in a position of power that you assume aren't gender specific or they affect men and women the same, but you don't realize until you're in the position, right? So this is a really big problem for Japan. It's actually really surprising to me, particularly given that the parties with the lowest, the left-wing opposition parties generally have higher representation of women, but the governing parties, which are the LDP, the main governing party, and their coalition partner, the Komeito, which is it's kind of funny to me as well that the LDP has the very lowest, but the Komeito actually has a very similar low representation, which, given what they are, because it's against the constitution for political parties to be affiliated with religions. They are definitely not affiliated with any religion, but they're essentially the equivalent of a Christian Democrat. They're affiliated with an evangelical, very, very large Buddhist organization in Japan. It's got like 20 or 30 million members. They've got like 1 in 5 of the population in Japan are a member of this religion. So you'd think from a party like that it'd be pretty easy to get a lot of women representation, but for whatever reason they don't put women on their party lists, and neither does the LDP. And when you come in, and the stories about what happened after the Kobe earthquake as well, how when you go into a lawless situation, there are people who take advantage, and there is surprising a number of people who aren't people who take advantage and commit crimes and violence against women. But the people in charge just don't even realize that that's a problem that they have to plan for. And that definitely was a problem. Just to back this up even further, in terms of a survey of the perception of the gap, men and women, as expected, women think there's more of a problem than men. And in terms of 75% of female respondents to the survey that was carried out, I think, by Dentsu, by advertising company, feel that men have a better position in the society, while 54% of men gave the same answer, which again is to say, most men understand that men are in a better position than women, but there again, 46% of men don't acknowledge that. And I'm pretty sure a pretty high percentage of people in decision-making positions have that. Also, the ratio of women holding senior positions in companies, when people were asked how long it will take to reach 30%, the average answer that came back was 24.7 years. Women generally thought it would take longer. For there to be a female prime minister, some people thought on average 27.9 years. I actually think in a way the prime minister thing is more likely, because it only has to be one person, and there are people that it could be. There are people, there are a lot of women cabinet ministers and so on, even though they make up such a small percentage. I think the idea of 30% representation in senior management is longer off, and I know it's not the sort of thing you can snap your fingers and fix. It's not just a matter of having the willpower, which is only very recent, to actually have more women board members and senior managers and so on. But you also have to have a pool of people that are in positions to be eligible for that. So when you've pressured women to quit because they've had a child or gotten married or something like that, and they're out of the workforce, the idea of reintroducing them as senior managers when you're the one who kicked them out of the company. If you want people to come in and be in the position to be senior managers and successful, you've got to find ways to accommodate people and keep them in the company and keep them on a career track, even when they are going through life changes. I mean, it's just, so, there's really from the bottom up, you've got to overcome the entire system, as well as overcoming the expectations that, because so many women expect the system to be like this, they resign themselves to it, and they don't have even the, when you don't expect that, when you assume that you're going to be excluded from opportunities for career development or senior management, then a lot of people don't even aspire or even think to aspire to it. This is the whole reason that you have affirmative action and so on as well, for other forms of discrimination. And with many of the same problems that, first of all, you've got to create the psychology that people want to and can become leaders. And then you've got to give them the support to develop to be successful as leaders. And then you make them leaders. You don't just suddenly do it. So yeah, Japan's got a long, long road to go on this. And the reasons for doing it are obvious, and they're documented, that companies with more diverse boards are more successful, they're more profitable, they're better for shareholders. And a lot of funds are actually saying that they will not fund or invest in companies that don't have diverse boards. It's considered a sign of competitive weakness to be like that. So, companies are sort of turning the circle, even if it's only out of self-interest. But it's a lot of stories this week about that. So that is what's going on with... a lot of news stories this week, which I think they're actually interconnected. I mean, it's horrible, the stories about sexual violence after the Great East Japan earthquake and from the Kobe earthquake as well. But I think that the issues are partly linked, again, just to the role and participation of women in Japanese society. And it's good to see at least it's being acknowledged now as an issue, but unfortunately it's hard to see the situation improving rapidly as it should. Back into the comments. Raz, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate that. Good to see you. And who else is in here? We've got definitely did not need more me in Parliament. I've been told that I'll be a single man if I ever end up in politics, which, don't worry, I'd have to be a Japanese citizen and interested, and neither of those things apply. US 67th, yeah, US is also doing kind of crap. Although in the US, in its defense, US is a first past the post election system, which actually makes it really hard to manage the representation. There's no proportional representation or party management. Japan doesn't have the same excuse. Japan can actually just wave a wand and decide who goes on its lists and increase the number immediately. So America doing badly, but partly that's just the nature of the electoral system there. It's different in Japan. Tai Nakamura, Ohio, good morning, aloha, good to see you, and good to have you here in the chat. And who else is in here? Alex, good to see you, Alex. Aaron, indeed, thank you for reminding people to press the like button. I'm glad to see that the moderator didn't moderate you saying that this time as well. Good to see the moral support. And yes, one Japanese politician guy giving a dislike. Well, that's I'll proudly take a dislike if it was based on what I was just saying. I guess that's the tax I've got to take. Santa Cruz, skateboarding and well-known surfing town, capital, culturally very influential. Everyone in New Zealand knows Santa Cruz. Good to have you, Sleepy 314. So yeah, that is the first set of topics for the night. The second set of topics. Oh, you know what? These stories got a little bit out of sequence because it had go to travel, so I thought the next was about the updates on COVID-19. However, there's another topic here I was going to put, which is kind of tied in. Well, Aaron, you don't have to worry about editing this one, but again, just another idea of what happens when you don't have adequate representation of women in decision making of rules and laws that affect women. You have this in Nagasaki Prefecture. It was found that public schools, and this is actually something that you hear about nationwide, so public schools not only have rules that you have to have black hair or hair, terribly discriminatory, but they also have rules that you have to, sometimes they have rules designating the way that you wear the uniform, including the underwear that you wear underneath the uniform. Schools saying that you're not allowed to wear colored underwear, you have to wear white underwear. And apparently in 60% of schools, in public schools, these are not private schools, these are schools that you are required by law to send your kids to, the teachers and school boards actually have rules. Not only that they have to wear white underwear, but that teachers are permitted to inspect and check the color of their underwear for compliance reasons. And again, I would like to think that if you had women anywhere on these school boards, the idea of having teachers, and remember that teachers in Japanese schools only have to have a college degree of any sort. They don't actually have to have teacher training. They don't have to go to, there's no sort of ethical training or anything like that. The whole problem that we've talked about in previous episodes of the kinds of people that can end up teachers. I mean, sometimes the people you very least want to become teachers, going into education systems where they're actually give themselves the power and the obligation to check the underwear of all the students. 60% of schools in Nagasaki, that's not the sort of rule that you would have if you had women, I think, participating in the rulemaking process. And yeah, that was on NHK. That prefecture has a particularly high checking the students' underwear rule. And WTF, right? I mean, it's crazy. And NHK itself was calling this out as crazy. And, you know, and hopefully Nagasaki gets shamed and embarrassed into reconsidering if that's worthwhile. And these are for high school kids. So just absolutely ridiculous, right? And yes, Mr. Korichep, you heard that right. Teachers have a test, right? As I understand, I think for teaching high school, I remember, well, again, they might have changed these rules, but when I was working in IT as an IT consultant, Wingstar, I knew someone who was just fed up being an IT consultant, and they had an economics degree, and they said, yeah, they're going to go and teach private junior high, and, they were going to go and teach social studies or something like that. And the guy who was doing it said, oh, yes, and it's a girls' school, haha. And yeah, that was slightly weird, but yes, he had no qualification whatsoever, and they were talking about how easy it was. There was no specific teachers college. They may have changed these because they've had so many problems with it, but again, they want to attract people to the teaching profession, and it's really common for teachers in Japan to not have any either teacher training or, frankly, skills related to education. You have people who basically failed at other professions who have gone into it. This is why you can end up with so many dud teachers in high schools in Japan. So that is another thing. It's not, now, to be clear, that's not normal. That, although in Nagasaki Prefecture it looks like it's normal, but it's definitely not normal throughout Japan. It's being called out as weird by NHK, but it is something that exists and is not, and is relatively widespread. And again, it just shows that the system in Japan is very one-sided, and either I mean, look, there's two ways to look at a rule like this. It's either perverted and by intention, designed to take advantage of schoolgirls, which I don't think it is, or it's just blindly ignorant to the risk that they're creating and to the discomfort that they're creating for women. I think the best way and most positive way to look at it is that, but that in itself shows the problem of not having women represented in rulemaking. To point out what an absurdly stupid and potentially dangerous rule that is. So that's where that is. Anyway, back into COVID-19. How's COVID-19 going? So as I was talking earlier, while in the rest of the country the numbers came down steadily enough that they did lift the nationwide state of emergency early in Osaka and Fukuoka and Hyogo, Aichi. I think I said Nagoya Prefecture last week. Nagoya is in Aichi Prefecture, so Aichi, Gifu, those other prefectures. However, in Tokyo, the numbers still were coming down, but they were coming down really slowly. In fact, the rate of decline is basically almost flattened out. And people aren't sure exactly why. There's two theories. The first theory is that people in Tokyo, well, honestly, there isn't really a real lockdown. They're just asking restaurants to close at 9 o'clock. Because most of the contact traced clusters, it turns out there are more cases involving restaurants than there are, for example, pachinko parlors. There aren't many cases that have been traced to those. And so the government's been a bit more targeted based on, they're following the data as to where they are asking, but they're not asking these places to close down even. They're just asking them to reduce their hours to discourage people going to these things for long periods of time or having like New Year parties and stuff like that. But it's all voluntary, basically. There's no mandatory lockdown. Even the request for early closing of high-risk establishments is voluntary. So there's one theory, which is that there is fatigue of complying with all of these voluntary shutdowns. It's been going on for a year already, and people who don't have it, and when you're seeing increasing crowds, that gives you confidence. Well, everyone else is okay, so yeah, maybe it's not a big deal. And in places like Saitama, for example, the number of people out and about, in spite of it still being a state of emergency, extended until March 23rd, 1st from March 7. It's been extended for 2 weeks in the greater Tokyo area. In Saitama, they found last weekend that there were 55% more foot traffic than there normally is. So people clearly, by the way, that was a much bigger increase than there was in central Tokyo, but there was an increase, i.e. people are just getting sick of staying home, and they're thinking, screw this, and they're going to go out and take their chances. That is definitely happening more, and that is definitely causing the decline in the rate to remain the same. You can see the averages up there for today. I believe the average right now is 254.1 cases per day on average over the last 7 days. So it's coming down, but it's the previous week was 277.4. So it's basically still, it's basically not coming down anymore. The number of serious cases also has actually slightly increased in the last couple of days, but it's staying steady around 50. The other theory about why the decline is slowing down is right now there isn't data coming out in the regular stats as to whether these are these new mutations, these new variants, such as the one from the UK, the ones from Brazil, the one from South Africa, and so on, that it's seen as being both more contagious and possibly not as responsive to the vaccines that are being used, although that's not really an issue right now because we still don't really have vaccines going around except for medical workers right now. But yeah, there is this idea that there could be these more contagious variants that even if people are complying with the SOE, it would have been more effective, except now we have particularly the UK variant has now been identified in a number of cases. And there's a suspicion that because it's more contagious, that it may be actually causing another uptick to start already. So yeah, based on this, the government decided that by some measures they'd set for ending the state of emergency, Tokyo was sort of almost in the zone. They decided to take 2 more weeks. It's not clear at the moment. I mean, given that the trend is definitely flattening out, frankly, that would just say at the end of 2 weeks we're probably going to be in a very similar situation, and maybe they'll just need to continue and extend the state of emergency again, which is bad for the businesses, particularly most affected, but at the same time, the country can't really do a lot about that. But there's something else which I noticed, which a lot of people are starting to talk about, which is this. Tokyo University Economics Department, which is looking at data associated with the waves that have happened until now. Each one of the waves where this is the 3rd wave that we've had in Tokyo, they've all been 4 or 5 months apart. And given that this one is now ebbing, the predicted by any model, by best and worst cases, all of them still predict now that the next peak is likely to now come to Tokyo at the end of July, i.e. in the middle of the Olympics. And there was a suggestion that by extending the state of emergency by 2 weeks, it could actually dull the peak of the next wave, which is undoubtedly going to come and will undoubtedly be in the middle of the Olympics in the end of July, which no matter how big the next wave is, the fact that Tokyo is going to be probably in the middle of another wave at the time that the Olympics is held makes it look increasingly like a really dumb idea. The other thing is that this is all data based upon, of course, the assumptions that, for example, over 65-year-olds will largely be vaccinated before the Olympics, but most of the rest of the population will not. Also, summertime, so some people pointed out on Twitter that, people will have their windows open, there'll be better ventilation and so on. These are things that are thought to contribute more to less transmissions, but there again, it still happens, and there was still a wave in the middle of last summer. But what's not being really counted is that we're going to have over 100,000 athletes come to Tokyo. Or basically, I think the numbers are going to be, I forget the exact ratios, it's like 70,000 athletes, and the support staff and VIPs will basically come to a total of over 100,000 people. The government's approach to this is going to be that they are going to ask these people to voluntarily stay in their accommodations and the training venues and the competing venues, and have a bubble where basically only Olympians will associate with Olympians, and they won't, please do not go to Roppongi and go drinking and partying and doing other things that people do in Roppongi. Behave, stay in your dormitory and at the Olympics, and and based on the assumption that all Olympic athletes are extremely well behaved, dignified people, that they will not be, in spite of coming from 200 countries around the world, that they will not be bringing in or changing the predicted numbers of cases that we're going to have in Tokyo, which will be going through another peak, another wave at that time. However, just in case, the Olympics are providing 160,000 condoms to athletes, based on the data that apparently 75% of athletes during the Olympics will generally, according to statistics, get it on at some point. And so, yeah, again, given what happened in the Rio Olympics and so on, and nothing wrong with that sort of thing. I mean, it's part and parcel of the Olympics, but basically, the idea that all of the Olympians are not going to, probably, if not before, certainly once their events are done, that they're not going to be sneaking out and going to Roppongi and going around the girls who know the names of all the ships in Yokosuka. I've met a couple of those. People are gonna interact, and there's gonna be. It's kind of funny the reaction to the story that they're handing out all these condoms because 75% of them have sex. There were two reactions to the comments of this on Nichan. The first half of the comment said, "Oh, I'm going to start working out so I can become an athlete." A lot of internet lonely guys on here. The other half said, if people are bonking, presumably that would be considered a close contact, and would that be a coronavirus risk? Which, I mean, they don't have to be doing that for it to be a risk. But again, this just looks increasingly like a really, really terrible, bad idea, in every single way. In terms of vaccines, they're going to have 36 million doses, which will be enough for the population over 65, but they are not going to prioritize Tokyo or other Olympic venues. So, the communities around these areas are not going to be extra protected. In fact, I guess middle-aged people, like I'm now becoming, are probably going to be in the highest risk associated with this. And I don't know, maybe I'm just going to have to stay at home. They're still debating whether to allow foreign tourists to come and actually attend the games. They're going to make a decision on that by the end of March. They're also debating about whether even Japanese can or should participate, or if they should limit numbers or whatever. But again, everything points to this is going to be in the middle of another wave. So it seems to me like this is costing, these Olympics were supposed to cost $5 billion US, but they're now costing $26 billion US. And for what? For something that could actually cause deaths. I mean, it just seems like a terrible idea. The other problem that I have now, and where I've really come around to thinking this is actually a terrible idea, is that also why this is happening. While this is happening, as I've pointed out recently, 6 months after the Tokyo Olympics, we'll have the Beijing Olympics, the Winter Olympics. And I think that if we weren't having the Tokyo Olympics a couple of months from now, and everyone wasn't focused on asking, is this even a good idea? Is it safe to go to these Olympics? Isn't it going to be dangerous? Isn't this a terrible idea? Are we really doing this? And that's the discussion that's happening around the Olympics. People are not asking the other question that they should be asking about, should we be having the Olympics in Beijing? Like, if there were no Olympics in Tokyo, everyone would be pointing out, when you've got up to 3 million people in concentration camps in Xinjiang, when you've got the Chinese government announcing that they are changing the electoral system in Hong Kong to basically exclude all opposition, i.e. they're basically just shutting down the democracy there. With all the problems that you have happening in China, and asking, I mean, would you, when a country is in the middle of a genocide, would you let Rwanda host the Olympics in the middle of? You would now, actually. Rwanda's doing amazing now, but would you have done it when you knew that there was a genocide going on there? And granted, I mean, I know it's a very big country, but 3 million people in concentration camps. I mean, people should be discussing this, and honestly, China should be getting killed for it. But I think that Tokyo is running interference for them right now and grabbing all the attention. So it's kind of funny. Japan is doing China an enormous favor, distracting the discussions that should be being had about the Winter Olympics at the start of 2022. No one's thinking about that because they're focused on Japan. In terms of vaccinations, by the way, they are obviously, the vaccines are being approved late. They're mostly being imported from overseas, so they're still coming in smaller doses. I've seen people on the internet saying, well, why is Japan being so slow? UK and America have already gotten through. I've already got my second shot, and congratulations to you on that. I would point out, though, that, the UK and America, I mean, you get to be our hamsters, our lab rats for the rest of the world, because those were accelerated approvals. There was so much pressure to put those on. I'm okay with the fact that Japan is doing extra safety tests and trials and being actually careful to make sure that the Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer vaccines are safe before they start distributing them. Again, people getting antsy saying, hey, look, you can see people using it in America. We know it's safe. And it looks like it is. But I don't mind the fact, when the announcement came here that Moderna looks like they're going to get approval in May, and people are saying, we can't wait until May, other countries already have it. Yeah, if they're doing it to make sure that it's safe, I'm okay. Like I said, we've gotten through 12 months. It sucks. This whole thing sucks, and I can't wait to get vaccinated. I'm resigned that I'm probably not going to be able to get vaccinated until at least like September or October. But you know what? I'd rather be vaccinated in October than be vaccinated with something that wasn't safe or proven, or experimentally. Now, I mean, I suppose if I had the opportunity to volunteer for an experimental, I might volunteer for a trial of a vaccine, although I don't really see a need for it. But, for myself to do so. I'm glad that they're getting it right here, frankly. So, I'll wait my turn, and I'll look forward to taking it. I'll definitely take it when it's ready. I'm not so antsy that Japan is, frankly, still going on an accelerated timetable. This is still faster than you'd normally do with any medical treatment, but they're being a little bit safer about it than, frankly, they were being in other countries, and I'm glad about that, although congrats. I mean, it's actually amazing to hear that the UK is going to get everyone in the country vaccinated before June. I mean, that's actually amazing what they've achieved over there. I know whenever I say something like that, isn't UK doing a good job or something, immediately a bunch of Brits start complaining about domestic politics there that I don't care about. I mean, in the end of the day, I don't think Boris Johnson is personally, vaccinating everybody. It's the medical system, it's the doctors, it's the whole system there that's doing it. And I think they've done a good job, and they deserve credit for it. But I'm okay with the way it's happening in Japan, but it still is going to take a long time. So that's what's happening with the Olympics and COVID-19. Into the comments. A lot going on there. Let's have a look at, try to find where I was before. A lot of comments, actually a lot more comments to this than the gender stuff in the beginning. Quint Rankin, did they interview the wives of the teachers about the underwear inspection? No, they didn't, but like I say, my whole mind boggles about that entire thing. Actually, I still see Wingstar. Hiko Simon is big in New Jersey. Am I big in New Jersey, or is that something as big? I'm sure I'm not big in New Jersey. I'd love to be big in New Jersey, but thank you. Dan H, good to see you in the comments, by the way. Good to have you here. Hope you were doing well. And Raz, thanks again for the super chat earlier. Coming down, we've got yes, Quint Rankin. I'm sure it would be awkward, or it should be awkward. I hope it's awkward. Traveling Gabriel, good to have you. Late to the stream, but no worries. Good to have you nonetheless. Believe in yourself. Greetings right back at you. Good to have you in the chat, and thank you for the hello. Andrew Moboy, when you were working at the Australian Open, only players and the support team were allowed workers to keep the tournament running, and crowds were 20 to 50% capacity. It sounds like they're going to do something like that with the Olympics, both with the crowd capacity and the limitation to staff, except, of course, the numbers are just so much bigger. And, of course, they won't actually have guards on the hotels enforcing the rules, You won't have people getting outraged at somebody, leaving the hotel like you had in Australia. But, yes. Andrew Moboy, in Tennis Australia, now 180 million in debt. No joke. Well, that's right. These things are hard to make profitable. But 26 billion, I think, imagine. And that's being paid mostly with Tokyo taxes. So, I'm going to be paying for these Olympics for the rest of my life. Even if they cancel them now, I'm going to be paying for them. But you know what? I'd still prefer that they cancel them, personally. But that's just me. Andrew Moboy, TA, except you'll take 5 years to start to make a profit again. IOC, because some have told future cities not to go into debt to build the facilities. Yeah, they say that, but they seem to do it every time. The Auckland Commonwealth Games were, at least up to that time, the only profitable Commonwealth Games ever. My dad was part of the company for that actually did that. But that's hard to do. But there you go. Iraq. Oh, it moved. Where'd you go? Sometimes it just jumps like that, and I lose my place. Okay, I'm just going to try to hold it here. Dan H, the PSL Pakistan League has been suspended due to 7 COVID cases, a mix of international players and local ones. That's only a handful of elite international players. Okay, so this is the cricket league in Pakistan. By the way, similar story that they've cancelled soccer games with the J League. Similar story when some of the players have been found to have had it, and they've also restricted stadium participation. So I think they're using those games as partly a proxy for figuring out what to do with this. But yeah, that seems inevitable. And Iraq299, good evening. Late tonight as you had a bit of work to tidy up. I know the feeling, and I'm sorry to hear that, but good to have you here in the chat nonetheless. Good to see you here. Was there a Tikyo Sam? I see people saying Tikyo Sam. Red Mercury, good to see you. Andrea, once again, many Aussies are skeptical of the vaccine too. Yeah. I mean, there's people who are skeptical everywhere. I mean, my mum lives in Queensland, and I go back down there. In Queensland, they're suspicious of fluoridation of water and daylight saving. So, yeah, it still astounds me that there are just so many people who are willfully ignorant and stupid when it comes to, science and medicine. It's literally Stone Age stuff. But and it's dangerous. I mean, these are the sorts of people that will drag us back into the dark ages. But yeah, they're sure that they're right and they're irrational. And yes, many they're all around the world. It's a human condition. But there seem to be a lot in Australia. I definitely noticed that myself. BTC Chiba, good to see you. Welcome. Good to have you on the show. Good to have so many people in there in the comments. Andrea again. Most of the adult population won't get injection until at least July. But considering the vaccine, it'll be Christmas Day. In Australia. Well, but Australia's got fewer cases as well. But yeah, it certainly is going to take time. Wingstar, sorry, not Japan related, but will I be watching the Meghan Markle interview? No, I don't care. I watched The Crown, and theoretically as a New Zealand citizen, well, they've quit from being people that could be my head of state, but no, I really don't care about the royal family. I mean, good on them and all, but there are things more important in my life than what Meghan Markle has to say about being a quasi-princess to Oprah. Not my bag, but yeah, I think I read the highlights on BBC. Believe in yourself. The viewers of Z Reviews have seen the title of this show and the name of Hikozaima. Is that right? I don't know if that's I don't know what Z Reviews is, if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there you go. And now I'm caught up. I hope I caught everybody who is also watching. Let's go back into the topics. I see that we've already just got 6 minutes left, so we are great to see so many comments. I appreciate all the chats. Speaking of how hard the government is working on the response to COVID-19, the head of the Economy Revitalization Ministry reported that a bureaucrat within his ministry has reported 378 hours of overtime. That's not 378 hours of working time. That's 378 hours of overtime while working on COVID-19 related matters. Now, just for perspective, if you work 8 hours a day in a 4-week month, that works out at 160 hours in a month would be a normal working month, and so that would be the baseline probably. So basically, to know the full number of hours that this person worked, it would be 538 hours. When I was working at a law firm, we actually billed hours, and you try to bill every hour. That if you're working on something that's doing that's billable, that's work for a client, you can end up the most I've ever done was 320 billable hours in a month, and that's basically the equivalent of my time in the month, and that's not overtime, that's complete time, 320 hours. So that's basically 160 hours. It's basically, it would work out if they were 5-day weeks, 16-hour days, except of course you're working on weekends and so on as well. I did the math earlier. If you took this person who did 378 hours overtime and they didn't work weekends, it would have worked out to an average of 26 hours a day. So they were obviously basically just working 7 days a week, full days, and probably first train to last train, and or sleeping in the office. When I worked 320 hours, I mean 320, this person worked 530. When I worked 320 hours, my health was going to shit. I probably worked more than that actually on my first job as an IT consultant. There was a time in cutover once where I worked 72 hours without sleeping. And that actually gave me heart palpitations at 23, and I was quite fit. 320 hours, I was a mess. The red line for working to death under Japanese labor laws is 80 hours. If you make anyone work more than 80 hours, you're obliged to report it to the Labor Standards Office. And companies can be prosecuted and named and shamed for making anyone work more than 80 hours. That's the working to death line. This person worked nearly 5 times the working to death level from within the government. And here's the funniest thing. the government is exempt from prosecutions under the labor standards laws for working people to death. The worst thing about this is that when the minister announced that this happened and apologized, he was probably quasi humble bragging about it. You look at how hard we're working to save everyone from coronavirus. You know, somebody worked 530 hours, 378 hours overtime. Where I come from, you know, if you hear that someone worked that much, you'd be pretty sure that you would say, well, all of their work must have been garbage, which I've unfortunately learned living in Japan, that you can do excessive overtime and still do competent work. But I say that resentfully. I wish it was garbage, and everyone realized that it's a terrible thing to do. But again, the old Japanese government, I know that they're working hard on these things, but they're, you know, when you're making anyone, let alone bureaucrats, work on this, you know, makes me want to take them out to dinner, for which they would also get fired. That is horrific. You know, 378 hours total would be horrific. I know people that have done that, but the most I've ever heard of, even in the legal profession, I heard stories of people who have done 450 hours, and those people were hospitalized. But, you know, 530 hours is just unimaginable to me. That's basically living and sleeping in an office. And because he's a bureaucrat, you know that they're not doing it by remote work. So that's ridiculous. Comments. I see lots of talk about butter, so I'm not going to have a look. I'm not going to get drawn into those. Comment from Andrea Mobway. They had a report from South Korea where parcel delivery workers over the COVID period died from overworking. Some were young and in their 30s, indeed. Oh, and definitely in Japan as well. And even before that, the whole idea with online shopping and stuff like that, that's been booming. The problem there being that the delivery companies are trying to get away with doing all the work. They're loving the extra business and they're getting paid by the online shopping companies, but they're trying to do it by making the existing staff do it. They don't want to increase their overhead by increasing the number of staff or paying them overtime. Sometimes they'll actually just say you have to deliver all the parcels, even if there are 5 times more parcels than there normally are. And yeah, it's the delivery companies are the ones that are abusing the employees, and they've been warned by the Ministry of Labor. But what's also happening in Japan is that it's the online shopping companies that are getting criticized. It's probably opportunistic from companies that are being disrupted by them to criticize the source, the shopping sites. But indeed, the delivery companies, which are wonderful in Japan, I'm sure they're good in Korea as well, notorious for overwork and abusing their employees. So, yeah, anyway, crazy stuff. Am I saying that bureaucrats are real people? Yes, believe it or not, they are. And it's kind of funny. They're often, I mean, again, it still is a not as much as it was, but it still is considered a prestigious profession. And based on the prestige of it, they still get to claim their pick of the smartest people from the top universities. The pay is crap, but they do get to live in dorms in really nice locations, like the North Imperial Palace Gardens and so on in Tokyo, right by Kasumiyaseki. And, you know, and they get pretty good perks when they go into the private sector for having that sort of a background. But, yeah, you know, at the same time, it's not easy work. So, no, I respect them for that. Back into the stories. We're coming up on the hour, so I'll try to motor through the rest of it. Honda just launched the world's first level 3 self-driving car, a car that can basically, you still have to be at the steering wheel and be ready to take over in certain situations, but the car can drive itself most of the time. They chose a Honda Legend. I didn't even realize that they were still making Honda Legends. You know, the Lexus, I suppose, of the Honda range. It's a $100,000 plus car. They're going to only have a limited run of the level 3 self-driving cars available. Most of them will be available for lease and as demonstrators, but they'll be driving around on Japanese roads. I still think if they're going to do a level 3, I mean, level 4 is where you don't need the steering wheel, and that's what I really want. I still think the Toyota Alphard, the sort of luxury big van cruisers, that's the ideal thing, where you can just basically lie down and go to sleep or watch movies or, you know, do whatever you want, you know, have it like a working office. That's the real. I don't know that I'd actually want to have full self-driving in a car like a Legend, you know, which is still very much you're sitting in a driving position. But yeah, wonderful to see that Japan's been kind of quiet on the self-driving front, but, you know, they're working really hard at it, and it's really cool that Honda got first to market to release this. They're doing exciting things with batteries. And Japan has the most battery patents of any country. So although Japan, like with the vaccines, like with everything else, Japan's quiet and keeping a low profile at the moment. Definitely Tesla is doing wonderful things, and a lot of big companies are out there sort of, taking the lead. But yeah, look out. Japan is coming, and they are doing really awesome things. And I think mobility is just going to be like a huge, huge area in the next couple of years. Speaking of delivery companies, Yamato Kuroneko, they've updated their logo to this. And actually, you know what? I originally came out a little bit critical. For the first time since 1957, they're updating their logo. The traditional logo, I think it's down here, is basically just a picture of a black cat. And they've simplified it. They've made it a bit more angular. And yeah, I think it looks okay. A lot of people sort of, I don't like this at all. The sort of square logo that they've chosen, I do not like. But this is basically the best delivery company in the world. They are amazing. I love them. They've had some problems with overworking their delivery workers, but they are a great company, and they're one of the best things about living in Japan. So yeah, interesting that they changed the logo. Other stories, yeah. It looks like the Minister of Transport, Akabane-san, has decided that he's grown true brain cells, and apparently the government is now realizing that, yeah, we might not restart the Go To Travel COVID-19 spreading campaign after all. Yeah, we're just going to keep that one on ice for now. It looks like it's going to be difficult to resume it. Hell yes. I mean, yeah, look, when everyone's vaccinated, go crazy. But of course, it's been responsible for the resumptions until now. On Netflix, if you've watched The Age of Samurai Battle for Japan, I watched it, and honestly, I don't know a lot about the Sengoku Jidai. I know the names, I know roughly, I know the Battle of Sekigahara and so on. I know that there are these significant sort of battles. I know vaguely about the characters and so on, but honestly, I've never gotten really deep. And NHK is sure it's non-stop historical taiga samurai dramas, and I know that I can watch them, but they always look a bit cheesy and a bit clean and theatrical and sort of like the Japanese version of Shakespearean sort of plays. And I must admit, I find it interesting when I see someone explaining it really well, but I've never really been into it. But someone said to me that they watched this and they thought it was really good, so I watched it. And I don't have a great deal of historical knowledge, but I'd say I was entertained. That said, just this evening I watched a review by a channel that does nothing but talk about Sengoku Jidai and samurai history. They did a review of and they basically called it garbage because it just missed out. It just had some gaping gaps in the narrative. Like, for example, they made a big focus on Hideyoshi Totomi's focus on the Toyotomi's focus on the north of Japan, and they made a big deal of a guy Matsumune Date as like this really important guy. And one of the criticisms was the north didn't matter at all. Date was like nobody and completely inconsequential. They skipped out the entire campaign to take over the entire west. Shikoku, Kyushu, 10-year-long sieges. They completely just skipped over all of that. They eliminated a lot of really important characters. So in terms of like accurately reflecting the history, what they told was accurate, but it was a really, really cut down version of it. That said, the dramatic scenes were pretty visually, I thought, well done and interesting. The fact that they portrayed the way that the characters, the samurai, they all looked familiar. As the reenactment actors were actors that you see in Japanese TV shows and movies and so on. So it looks like they got good actors for it. But rather than portray them as traditional samurai that look like me with a ponytail at the back, but with this all sort of shaved, they basically had them all with like shaved hair around the sides and with the little beards and everything. They basically looked like biker gang members, Japanese biker gang members, which was good for at least a kind of refreshing portrayal of them as like badass sort of guys. But again, that was completely like nothing like what any of them would have looked like or how they would have presented themselves. So, there's some criticism. It was good and bad. But look, I found it entertaining. And for me, it gave me an interest, actually, in doing more reading up on the period. It is fascinating. And it was relatively well done. So if you actually know anything about the history, apparently the word is don't watch this. But if you're not really into samurai dramas and stuff like that, and you don't know a lot about Sengoku Jidai, which I actually put myself in that basket, yeah, this was pretty entertaining. It was pretty good. And I think it's a good entry point to the subject, so long as you understand that it misses out huge gaps. So you should actually go and research yourself after watching it, but that was good. Another excellent video that I watched this week by Unseen Japan. This is like 38 minutes long, but it's actually the history of the colonization of Hokkaido going back a couple of hundred years. But really, really lays clear that, Hokkaido wasn't until like last century Japanese. I mean, it was actually the people up there, the Ainu people, and the various people that combined and became the Ainu, and the sort of mystery of who they are. But the fact that, actual Japanese control of Hokkaido was really only to the very bottom of the island for a long time. The actual timing that Hokkaido was as a whole colonized and became part of Japan, I mean, for a time it was a separate country during the various revolutions and wars that happened after Japan was opened up by Perry. But the actual period that Japan started to take over and occupy the lands in Hokkaido, was actually the same time that New Zealand was colonized in the mid-19th century. And there's a lot of parallels, actually, as a New Zealander watching it, that the same things. Do you acknowledge the different culture, or do you try to assimilate and suppress them, and do you go back and forth on that? Hokkaido is just fascinating history. It's a huge island with history going back 25,000 years, and only the last 150 of those years have really been Japanese. Before that, there was a long period of little outposts and little colonial settlements, but where the island was overwhelmingly occupied by people who were not identified ethnically as Japanese. And it really shines a light on like all of Japan and how Japan itself sort of came to be as well. I mean, this is over time. Honshu was at a time occupied by Jomon people and Yayoi people, and they got sort of pushed out by and probably merged together with the Yamato people that came and took over. This is really, really well done. This is a really good documentary, and it was fascinating. I highly recommend it. The Colonization of Hokkaido on the Unseen Japan channel. And we're over time, but racing through the final ones. This is not Ken Tanaka. This is his brother, David Yuri, who is as far as I'm concerned, quite famous. He is prolific. Anyway, he is on a lot of, based on Los Angeles. He features in like every major TV show, like Breaking Bad, Heroes. He's been a bunch of stuff. And to pass the time, he posts dramatic monologues where he dramatically does performances of monologues that are the lyrics of 1980s sitcoms. And yes, apart from the fact that they are all awesome, he's done so many of them, different strokes and so on. The other day he posted one, and it came to me, you should do Greatest American Hero. So I said, do Greatest American Hero, and he did the opening theme, which is, by the way, just an awesome theme song. It's just a great song, non-stop, the Greatest American Hero theme song, and he did it as a dramatic monologue, and I appreciated it. So you should actually check out the whole series. They're all awesome. Like watching someone passionately give a monologue based on these theme songs is very, very good. Mr. Korichev, different person, but very, very talented. Thank you, Aaron, once again for the posting the short videos during the week. Go and check those out. They're much more digestible. That's the show. Wasn't too bad. Got about 5 minutes over time, I think. How am I doing on time? 1 hour 7 and 12. I can see that over there. Well, not bad. Quick look back at the comments. I see there's a good night there from Andrea Morboy, who is out. So good night to her. Good to see everybody else in there. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Lots of interesting stuff going on. Remember, as always, a couple of things. I am on Clubhouse. I'm still trying to figure out the purpose of Clubhouse. I mean, if I could be in Clubhouse, like having a chat with all of you, I would love that. I go in there and it's a bit like walking in. I find Clubhouse like walking into a bar where like you're sober and you don't know anyone. And you're supposed to strike up conversations with people, and some people find that easy. Some people probably need to be drunk, and and it's not like you're going to sit there all day. Like that's awkward as well. But it's always so awkward trying to find a conversation that's interesting and that you can participate in. Some of the interesting conversations have like 900 people in them. But when it works, it works. A couple of times I've been in there with people that I either know or that are interesting and familiar enough that I can join the conversation. When it works, it's interesting. I'm still trying to figure out whether honestly, I'm not sure it's a great format, but if you have installed it and are looking for a chat, add me. It's the same username as my YouTube, as my Twitter, Hiko Simon, so add me on Clubhouse. Just generally speaking, I post all of these on Twitter. That's where you can find me anytime during the week. And remember, every week I am back here Tokyo Tonight should go for 40 hours a day. I'd have to report myself to the Ministry of Health, Labour and Welfare and the Labour Standards Bureau, like those bureaucrats. Sergeant Bilko is iOS only. So I know that that's a big filter. And, you know, but if you're on there, I would love to be connected at least to anyone who watches this. So I assume we can have a conversation. It'd be nice. I'd love to have a chat room, an open chat sometime. But for now, I have this, and I appreciate that I get to do this with you guys every week at 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. And even if I don't post a notification in advance, you know that I'm going to be here. And I'll let you know if I'm not. So, yeah, thanks again for joining me this week. Love all the comments. Remember, like the video if you liked it. It does help, and I do appreciate it. Massive thanks again to Aaron, who sits there very patiently in the supporting with the moderating in the chat, and who does the awesome work on creating the short videos of this, which I really, 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 really appreciate. So, indeed, Brianna W. 80s sitcom themes are instant happiness for me too. I was a total TV addict kid, so I've still got all of them completely memorized. So yeah, have a good week, everybody. Stay safe, of course. Wear a mask, do all that good stuff, get your shots, and see you back here next week. And have a good week, everybody. If you're in Japan, have a good Hanami. If you're in Tokyo, stay home, enjoy Hanami from walking, and don't go and sit down in parks and do anything like that. Try to hang on. We'll be out of the state of emergency soon. And the rest of you, have a great, safe week, and see you later. Peace. Boom. Ending the show. Do I want to end? Yes, I will end. See you later.